Welcome to another episode of Revving Up with RevEng. I'm here back with Bill Dwoinen. Another exciting episode where we're going to really focus on what's changing in sales and go-to-market in 2026. Bill, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to episode 2 here.
I am as well. Before we get started, a big thank you to our sponsor for this episode, Akron, a leader in global incentive compensation management systems. If you're in need of a new system or you're thinking about how to adapt the best in technology and AI for sales compensation, check them out at www.akron.com. So without further ado, Bill, thank you again for joining us. I'm curious, you've been in sales for 20 plus years. Obviously, there's been a lot of change in the recent 12, 24 months. How do you think selling has changed in the last, call it 3 years?
It's such a hard question because it's almost more of like, what's the same than it was 3 years ago? And I date myself when I say this. A lot's changed. I want to break it down into 2 categories. And I want to break it down into what's changed in the more, human side of it, and then what's changed because of technology. When you look at the spaces I've been in, whether it's the human capital world, collaboration space, growth, especially in certain segments, and growth based upon changes the pandemic caused, how we work, led to very unorganic buying cycles. And it almost created behaviors that we're all trying to unwind now.
How do you define unorganic?
Well, it was just more of, companies were hiring. Look, when I was at Salesforce, they went from 30,000 employees to 70,000 employees. Like that's in a year. Like that's not companies that were selling. Let's say, like, if you look at a company like Salesforce or PayPal, they were building out their headcount plans. Like a lot of companies, like, wow, if we hire more salespeople, we can go cover all these verticals that we're not covering today. And so headcount was doubling and tripling. So what that would mean for your deals is that you wouldn't necessarily have to do the things that you used to do to go drive a deal, right? You used to have to go drive demand, where most deals that I've seen the last 3 or 4 years have been companies that were overconsumed. They had more users than they paid for, or their teams doubled in size, or IT teams were doubling. And so there was all this growth that was not necessarily sustainable. And along the way, you didn't have to do some of the more natural things that are required in sales, right? Like, back in the day, when I say back in the day, I mean 5, 6 years ago, right? You would jump on earnings calls, you would, do your research, you would try to build a point of view, you would do discovery, you would have to go create demand outside of a renewal. You'd have to try to go break in the new teams. Like you have to do all these things naturally. But then when you look at kind of the overconsumption of software, that's where teams were winning. But then those fundamentals now are necessary. And so the biggest thing is, how do we, what we call it here is kind of this growth mindset. When you think about some of the fundamentals of forming a point of view on an account, the people that send me an email that actually says something about me, my background, mural, that I'll take those meetings, I'll listen. And so it really is back to I hate saying back to the basics, but it really is back to the basics. And so number one is getting back to the basics of things like account plans, growth plans, prospecting, discovery. I think being in person is almost like cheating because teams stopped doing it.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, and I'm not saying for safety reasons and things like that. I mean, when we are all systems go back in the field, things like that. When you look at buying behaviors, that is a big change. If you look at the way that companies now kind of figure out on their own, whether it's through AI, through platforms like G2, whatever that is that companies are making decisions on their own if they want to make a move. What I have sensed, and this is me included, as a buyer, as a CRO, I'm not looking for more tools right now. So every single email I get that's like, do you want to buy something new? I'm like, unsubscribe. Like, no. Because back to our question on the first episode, as far as like, what's the role of a CRO? What happened over the last 4 or 5 years, it was, let me buy something for account planning. Let me buy something for prospecting. Let me buy something for account research versus what's our overall strategy? What's our overall vision for GTM systems? What's our strategy for outbound? What's our strategy for existing accounts? And so, you see a lot more of that, of just being more strategic. And so people aren't as open to like looking at new tools, but we saw this data point at our kickoff. It's like only 17% of buyers actually reveal themselves because they're doing everything on their own.
Mm.
And so that's a big one. That is a big one. And then the last one, obviously, is, in disruptions on a negative word, it's how do you think about outbound? You're able to build out a scaled SDR program through technology, or you're able to automate, the work of 50 BDRs with an agent. So it's just what you look for. It used to be, especially some of the traditional, well-known large software orgs, it used to be just go out, hire the problem of like hire more, hire more, hire more. And now it's how do you look at operational efficiency to scale some of those motions, and not just for things like cost of revenue or financial metrics, but there's just a more effective way to do it. And so those are the three buckets. It's like going back to some of those, like back to the basic sales fundamentals. Then number two is just the way in which customers buy has evolved drastically. Then the third is the role that technology is playing really has to have you think about just your overall go-to-market motion and how you, what I'm most excited about with AI is the ability to automate repetitive tasks and to make, because what salespeople or anyone customer facing needs to do is go spend more time with customers. And so if AI can help with that, that's what I'm most excited about.
Got it. Got it. And based on the dynamics that you just described, Bill, and you hit on it at the end around go-to-market motions, how do you make decisions around what investments you're making in product-led growth, sales-led growth, or hybrid of both?
Yeah, it's a tough question because it's what's that old saying is when everything is a priority, nothing is. And you can't, it can't be one or the other, right? Unless you're kind of this brand where everybody wants to, signing up for free. And that's what PLG is, right? And the company I was at before this was like one of the most well-known PLG companies and one of the ones that nailed it of, that kind of user experience, self-serve experience, turning into an account, so on and so forth. And so the way we're thinking about it, beyond this year is you have to focus on both. When you think about that PLG journey, starting with the user experience, you have to become obsessive about that of what is that user journey along that motion? And then how does it turn into a sales led motion? And it's less about separating the motions. Like we just went through this great exercise yesterday of what is the journey of PLG through sales led. That might be a 2-year journey from PLG to sales led, and going back to some of the fundamentals of PLG of how do you create a great experience for users when they come to your platform, and how do you make it conducive for them to do the things that turn them into a qualified account, and all the great marketing terminology. Then on the sales led side, you have to nail that, but you have to look at it a bit different. So it goes back, I don't know if you've seen this, but you see a lot lately popping up this role of like GTM engineer. And it's a really fascinating role. And it's hard to actually see it consistently defined. It's almost like GTM systems 15 years ago, or even a CRO now, where you might not see one job description that's the same, but it's how do you orchestrate a process tied to the motions you want to run? So it's not just like, oh my gosh, we have to go hire 20 new logo reps because there's a moment in the market that we can go meet. It's not. It's how does product marketing automation come together to have this sales led motion? And you really think about that journey from a not just existing accounts, but also prospects as well. And so it's not one or another, at least for us, it's not. But I think what you're seeing, what I'm hearing a lot from other CROs is kind of that PLG, SDR type motion, and really relying on automation to kind of handle that bucket.
Yeah. And obviously technology plays a huge role in all this. And I'm curious, where do you think we are in that journey? Are we still at the infancy? What is the revenue org of the future going to look like is it just an army of go-to-market engineers and salespeople? Well, I'm curious what your
I
predictions
don't
are.
know. We had this great guest speaker from Insight Partners who we love working with, and he said in his opening what everyone feels. What he said was it's confusing. So I don't know. The piece that stuck with me is I forgot who said it, but it was I'm not going to be replaced by AI. I'm going to be replaced by someone who uses it better than me. And that's really powerful. And so for me, it has become such a strong thought partner on things like revenue modeling or synthesizing data or being able to look and say, hey, I want to evaluate the last or analyze last 4 years of pipeline data. or I want to analyze, our existing business and see what themes are they, what industries. It's so cool to be able to do that within maybe some of the. I'll give you an example. Like one project was I wanted to look across our business at signals of meetings, pipeline created, user growth, and just say, tell me what's happening. And we learned so much from like what industries are meeting with us more. We thought it was one industry, it wasn't. So things like that are so powerful. And that may have been the work of 15 or 20 analysts, for 2 days, or
Wow.
one analyst for 3 weeks. And so I treat it as someone sitting next to me that I can work with and co-create with, not someone to give me the answers. And you see that in some of the outputs from people of like, come on, don't make it so obvious that you were like, give me the answer to the test. And so, okay, let me move away from my personal journey and how I use it to more what it means for GTM teams. And so we don't know yet. Where there's unified agreement is number one, first of all, it has to be in your product. That is like table stakes, right? Coming back to GTM motions, it's where do you insert it where there's value? If you don't, I've been on a million demos, and not a million, but like enough demos. And I can't take another call until we figure out our strategy. It's like going to the store and not knowing what you want to buy. And that's where it gets really tricky. And if you look at some of the shelfware companies have, if you look at some of the tool sprawl companies have, or just some of the lack of adoption with tools, it's because that lack of strategy. And I saw this with one of my customers a few years back, is their methodology was like AI everywhere for everyone. And they bought like everything and no one used it. It's like there was
Yeah.
fear. There was, how is it governed? There was, I don't know what to do. I don't know the use case. And like where I really push some of our partners is like, what's the use case for my persona? You don't have to sell me on AI. You don't have to sell me on an agent. You don't even have to sell me on how it works. I can research that on my own. Back to the original point of like, I can go build an agent on my own. I can figure that out. But it's, if you don't have a strategy, it's not going to work and everything's going to sit. And we even see that here of like, we have, and I'm all about investing. But when I look across our tools, you're like, ooh, there's like a lot of overlap. It's not that I'm trying to be cheap. Like, of course, you have to be mindful of what you spend on. But what our tooling represents is lack of strategy, if
And
that
is
makes
that,
sense.
yeah, it does. And is that how you make decisions on what tools to invest in?
Going forward, for sure. So I've been here for now a year, and we have more and more underneath us, I think, and all the teams are great. And it's not, before we go buy another tool, we have to first understand, away from tooling, what's our outbound strategy, what's our PLG strategy, then what are the tools that we need. But it should be, what is the problem, or what is the challenge, or what's the opportunity, and what solves for it, versus we have this product and we think it can solve for X. That's how companies were functioning of like, we just purchased Gong maybe 6, 7 months ago, but it really was, hey, I think we have this challenge and I think Gong can solve it. It wasn't, we like Gong, let's go find the challenge it can solve for. Do you see the difference in those two?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Don't chase the shiny object, chase the problem. Makes a lot of sense. Going back to something you said earlier, Bill, around how you're structuring your, I'm going to call it revenue strategy and operations as a broad term. I'd love to hear more about how those functions work together. I think you said revenue strategy, or systems, and operations. And thinking across all those teams, Bill, how do you ensure incentives are aligned? I firmly believe that revenue generation is a team sport. And so
It is. Yeah.
how do you, yeah,
It's a challenge. And it goes back to what I said on the first episode, is I don't think you realize you didn't have it until you have it. And I've seen this in organizations where you have CSMs operating towards one goal and sales operating towards what we know as revenue. And friction usually happens when those behaviors don't line up. And it's like even marketing of like, I'm so excited for events, because the danger sometimes when you have non-quota carrying teams is their KPIs and how they're measured and how they're paid don't drive the same outcomes. And that creates this behavior of, I'm going to do things just to check a box. And so, again, it's not just like an authoritative thing, but those teams being in my org was so critical. Because when we do comp planning, we build a comp plan for next year, there's more alignment. When we build incentives up, when we do spiffs, like I'm super excited to do spiffs this year, around the same outcomes for CSMs, for sales, for everything, where it's like all the things that we do should lead to user growth, pipeline growth, not like revenue is an outcome, right? Revenue is the outcome we're working towards, but you have to have those strategies of how do we grow users? How do we grow power users? How do we grow business sponsors? How do we engage with power economic buyers, like all the MedPick contact roles? Because when you do those things really well, the outcome gets there and everyone's happy. The customer is happy. CSMs are set up for success. And so it's the outcome is there. It's more how do you build process, accountability, and incentives around those things that get to the outcome. And in a way, I'm not saying this in a negative connotation, but sometimes comp plan levers help people get out of their own way to do things, or spiff levers or things like contest. And we had some really great levers in our comp plan last year that really incented the behaviors that we wanted and really helped us, stabilize our business.
Expand more on that, Bill, and how does comp lovers help people get out of
Well,
their
think
way?
about it. I can't share details of our comp plan at Mural, but like think about it, right? If I'm, the really intelligent ICs, and we have a lot of them, I think all of them are, they look at their comp plan and they say, hey, what are the levers I can maximize, right? Like, how do I actually maximize a comp plan? And that's why what I've seen over the last 4 or 5 years is more emphasis on multi-year deals. Customers want them because they want predictability, they want cost avoidance, and they don't want to have to go through evaluations. They don't want to have to every year go through an evaluation, go through an RFP. Companies love it because it gives you predictable revenue for 2 or 3 years. And so you've seen more incentives around things like that when you're like, oh, wow, if that incentive's not there, I want the compelling event again in a year. So I'm not going to sell a multi-year deal because that gives me now, again, you think like a salesperson. I'm a salesperson. I have 15 accounts and it creates a win-win. Like I have seen most of the calls I'm on with other executives, they want to lock in multi-year partnerships for predictability. Commercially, it's always a better deal, right? Volume and duration always play a role in that. And they just don't want to go through evaluations. And I do think what's happening a lot in the industry is like new leaders come in either with a preference of a certain tool, or they come in and go right into app rationalization. And people almost want to protect the tools they use. And I talk to a lot of other leaders across not just SaaS, not just collaboration. The saying is like, even the easy deals are hard and you have to earn it. That's why the whole like earn the right every day is just because someone's, at 120% of adoption doesn't mean it's going to be easy. And that goes back to what I said in the beginning. Like that's what's changed during the pandemic, post pandemic. Let's say I work specifically in comms, media, and tech, and all the tech companies were growing. And so you didn't have to necessarily, it just would happen organically where now a new leader comes in. Like, why did we buy all this stuff? And app
Yeah.
rationalization, I now see the other side of it where I look at the number of tools we have and you're like, yeah, it's not even about like wanting to be a bad partner to a vendor or just cost savings. It's more of like, we don't need 5 collaboration tools. We don't need, 13 iterations of a prospecting tool. And so that's where I think it's really evolved.
Yeah. What I've seen numbers as high as like the average enterprise org will have somewhere around 60 to 70 sales tools and they'll use maybe 10
Yeah.
consistently. Right. And
Yeah.
so it's not just talk about waste, it's like sheer confusion, right? If you have that much at your disposal and there's no commonality of like what to use when, and to your point earlier around why, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's when we have great partners, Gong, Outreach. I mentioned some of these Sales Nav, Focus, ZoomInfo, and they've been great. And when I go on calls, the first thing I say is like, I don't sure I want to see your roadmap, but what I'm more curious about is what are other companies like us doing? Like, bring us some thought leadership. It's confusing out there, right? Like, there's just so much going on, and again, not confusing because don't have the intellect to process it, but you're like everyone's kind of saying the same. So, what are other companies like us doing? And that's what Gong did a great job of. And I think ZoomInfo brought some great insights to the table and outreach. It's like, hey, what are other companies doing? What are best practices? And a roadmap that's not intentional, tied to my challenges or my problems, it's more of a detractor to me. It's like I don't like we're not even at like 50% utilization and maturation, yet you're selling me on the dream. Like that's just, you can't do that anymore. The whole sell the dream days are kind of over. And that's where I think I've seen our partners kind of lean in is like, don't come to me with like the next best thing. Cause that whole idea of shelfware, it's more about, hey, how do we maximize what we have today? And how does what you're building help us get to our goals?
Fantastic. We're about time, and I'm curious. Last question for you, Bill. What's one bet you're willing to make on how go to market and the sales landscape is going to evolve?
Oh my gosh, there's only one bet I can make, and it's going to just change consistently. I mean, that's it. Again, it's going to change consistently and faster than ever before. And it's not about who changes the fastest. It's about how do you bring everyone along with you. And that's why having a strategy is so powerful. It's if you just try to keep up with the change, right? Like it's not, that's the hamster wheel. And so I do think if you embrace it, it's exciting. I'm really excited about what we're about to embrace and what we're about to embark on. It's going to be hard. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be fast. It's going to be humbling. But if you buckle up and really embrace it, I think we're all going to come out of it on the other side better for it. Is the leader, is a thought partner, a thought leader from a strategy standpoint. And so simply put, it's not just that it's going to ever, always change. It's the pace of change will be like something we never saw.
Words for the wise. All right. Thank you again, Bill, for the time. If you haven't checked out our first episode, please do. Tons of great insights from Bill. And again, another big thank you to Akron for sponsoring this episode. This is your host, Quang Do. Thank you again for joining Revving Up with RevEng. Cheers.